Welcome to another episode of Sacred Medicine, where we destigmatize medicines of the past for a future of wellness. Today, we have James McConchie on the show with us, who is the owner and founder of Haight St Shroom Shop, which is a brick and mortar in San Francisco that focuses on the educational side of mushroom cultivation. Now, James is a mycologist, but he's also just an amazing person, and he's going to be talking with us on this episode his journey from being a Silicon Valley engineer to opening up his own shop through experiences he had with his wife's breast cancer and healing it through mycology. We'll also talk about ethics that are around the entheogen space and building business around it, as well as James potentially even using entheogens to help in his business decisions. This is a fantastic episode. I hope you watch till the very end. Well, hello, James. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing well, Jake. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. Even better now that I'm looking at that big, beautiful beard that you got on your face. Nice, man. Well, I'm glad to be chatting with you today. We got a great conversation lined up for everybody listening, and we're going to be touching on probably quite a few aspects of how business affects the plant medicine space, perhaps some of the the ethics moving forward, inclusion, things like that. And I think it's going to be a great conversation. But I want to jump right into it, and let's give people a brief introduction into who James is, your past and how you got where you are today.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you first and foremost. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been working with entheogens, fungi, plant-based medicine for the past, professionally for the past 5+ years, personally for many years beyond that, working initially as one of the recreational psychonauts. A lot of us entered in space, and then as I progressed and moved on to my world here as a professional, working in Silicon Valley, starting as a QA engineer and then moving up to program management, I was offered opportunities to kind of work with psychedelics recreationally again. And then my wife was unfortunately diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer back in 2016 while I was climbing that tech ladder. And that created space for us to learn more about alternative medicine in conjunction with Western cancer treatments and radiation and chemotherapy treatments. And we found the research and work of Paul Stamets with the turkey tail mushroom, which is an amazing adaptogenic mushroom for immune system health. And thankfully, or I don't know if it's thankful, but in retrospect, my wife's cancer diagnosis happened to be the exact same as Paul Stamets' mother, who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And then through the Western treatment and the work with the turkey tail mushroom, she came out the other side of the treatment cancer-free, and so did my wife. And so that's what started me on the journey revolving around mushrooms, because as much as I absolutely love Paul, I recommend all his products, all of the research, everything that he's doing. But my God, when you're paying for supplements on a quadruple scale on a monthly level, you start spending a lot of money on mushroom supplements. And that inspired me to start looking for mushrooms around me, because I realized these turkey tail mushrooms just literally grow a block away from where I sit right now. So that was the start of everything.
So you started foraging for turkey tail mushrooms, after this whole process of remission from breast cancer with your wife. So you started foraging, and did that quickly transform into you desiring to grow your own mushrooms, or did you spend an adequate amount of time just foraging and looking for them?
That's a great question. Actually never been asked that. It was at the same time. So what I realized from the foraging standpoint, it's literally a block, and when people come and take my class and we go into the foraging aspect of my workshops here in my physical space, I show the tree that I first recognized the turkey tails on, and they still grow on it even though the tree has been cut down, but it's literally right at the entrance of the park. And it was this catalyst for me that said, wait a minute, these are right here. And then And the idea of cultivation, of mental health, of well-being, I'm dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of things going on as my wife's going through this treatment. And the John Hopkins research into psilocybin for PTSD, trauma, and palliative care was going on at the same time. And my wife was actually a candidate for it because of the treatment that she was going through and the level of cancer that she had. And I remember joking to her and looking at her when we were doing this research and going, "Oh, hey, well, you take these mushrooms too." But it wasn't really what the application for, right? We weren't, for her, she wasn't in an end of life situation or anything like that. But because that research was going on at that exact same time that I was like trying to forage for mushrooms and find mushrooms for my wife, and I was dealing with a hell of a lot of stress trying to climb that corporate ladder in Silicon Valley. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners and a lot of people out there know or have some knowledge around the kind of subculture that existed here since the 90s, since even the 80s with Steve Jobs and the consumption of psychedelics in a microdosing format for mental development in software and productization and things like that. So I was gifted an opportunity to potentiate and try and cultivate my own medicine. And from that point forward, I realized it was something that needed to be shared with everybody. It's really quite easy.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty interesting, right? Like this thing that ultimately helped your wife in a pretty serious situation, a very stressful situation, both physically and emotionally. Like the thing that was helping was growing right around the corner, as you're saying. Like it feels almost oddly, not just full of synchronicity, but it seems like it dictates, some of the mindset that you have about, these fungi now that you work with them and how you feel about the space, that like they're just so open and accessible, in contrast with, paying, triple or quadruple digits per month to access them through another business.
Well, I mean, if we just kind of like take in relation to, herbs, plants, commodities, right? Like cannabis is a commodity now. It's no longer used as a medicine. And the thing is that cannabis, even though it's a commodity and pretty much it's the accessibility of cannabis across the country is like constantly increasing on a monthly basis, it still doesn't grow in the wild. It's not something that you can like go and find. It's simple. Like now, psilocybin containing mushrooms. Now, I have to advocate for safe foraging practices, right? Don't go eat a mushroom that you don't know what it is when you find it in the wild. But they do grow in the wild. Mm-hmm. So, it's the barrier to entry is different than, in plant medicines and commodification, mushrooms, entheogens, and psychedelics. They enter into a different point of cultural society and consumption than other plants and herbs that we work with into the commodification model. So when I look at, mushrooms in general, it's like whether you grow them, whether you purchase them, the way in which that you consume them or you get them, it should always be cheap, right? Because in the end, going and foraging a wild gourmet mushroom versus buying a gourmet mushroom off the shelf at your Whole Foods, there's differences. And I think you should do both, right? I think you should build that knowledge base to go and plant your own medicine, your own herbs, your own food. That doesn't mean you need to become a farmer. It just means you need to understand the scalability of where you can put these different types of food sources and medicines into your life. And mushrooms just happens to be this really simple one where I advocate for this idea of pick to pan, which is you have your little mushroom block growing on your windowsill right above your sink, and you've been spraying it with its mist, and all of a sudden there are your beautiful oyster mushrooms, and you go, oh, those are ready to cook. And you literally pick them right off the block, you chop them up, and you put them in the pan. And I guarantee you, my friend, your culinary experience with mushrooms, the amazing nutrients, the beta-glucans and the polysaccharides that you consume from mushrooms will absorb directly into your body, and you will recognize how this is such an amazing addition to everything that you're already doing.
We were talking before the podcast, but like as you're talking now, I I want to go out and get some tubs and start doing that like tomorrow. But so really briefly, but I do want to touch on some things that you mentioned. But let's talk for a second about what you do now. So you said that you were, in tech engineering in Silicon Valley, but that's not what you're doing now. Predominantly.
Yeah, that's right. So I left I left my Valley job. I was trying to climb that corporate ladder to director. I started as a sustaining engineer, which is sort of like in between tech support and the engineers. And then I moved up to a QA engineer and then a senior QA engineer. And then I became a program manager. I was actually managing the project. And my next step was to become work towards C-level or director. And I was being groomed to do so, which was a lot of work and a lot of energy. And I appreciate every single moment with it. However, what ended up happening is while I was going through my wife's treatment, things like that, and I want to say this to all my tech friends out there, everybody that's working, whether you're here in Silicon Valley or you're out there in Silicon Slopes, whatever you're doing, burnout is real. Those ideals of what the tech industry was 10 years ago and the work-life balance that existed with the Google jobs and the Yahoo. Remember Yahoo? Remember Yahoo, everybody? Remember Monster?
Ask Jeeves.
Right, Ask Jeeves. Actually, my wife worked for Ask Jeeves.
Oh, gosh.
A CNET company. That's actually My Simon. Remember My Simon? Yeah. So like all these weird tech companies, and what ended up kind of creating the transition for me was that the ask kept getting more and more, and the amenities that made working in tech became less and less. And so, I had to do this huge commute, and I reside here in San Francisco, but 90% of the jobs that I had in tech were up and down the peninsula, which, if you've ever dealt with Bay Area traffic, is, that's an extra 2 hours to your day, any day. So,
yikes.
And then the weird opportunity existed where I was able to transition out of the space, walk away to contract work with a close friend of mine, and then start this business. And I was just lucky. And now here I am sitting here teaching, home mushroom cultivation, coaching about microdosing protocols, teaching mushroom scaling, and business development in this emerging space, so that people are safe, so that there's equitable access, and so that everybody gets an opportunity to be at the table.
That's incredible. And you're doing this through your business, just because we haven't specifically mentioned the name on the podcast at the current moment, but it's Haight St Shroom Shop, which locally in San Francisco, run out of there in one of the most expensive places in the world. And there's obviously enough interest to, not only sustain yourself, but to keep spreading the word, which is incredible.
Well, I always, it is an expensive locale to try and own a retail space at, but that's not really the important factor of what I do, because I think in the end, it's trying to connect with people in the right levels, to create that, what I like to call mycelial growth. Mycelium is the wood wide web. It is the connecting factor for all people that are interested in connecting to the greater consciousness, and it's below us too in nature. And when we can kind of tap into that root source, we create these connections with everything that we're doing and everybody that we're engaging with, that offer opportunities for all of us to learn and grow. And what I realized as I was building this business out and trying to, I'm from tech, what it was: scale bigger, stakeholders, investors, all these words. Oh, big words. Oh, we got to make sure synergy, like inside the box, think outside of the box, but let's be in a box, like all these things. And what I realized was that, my skill, or the thing that I offered the best, was to be able to have conversations like what we're talking about here, just people one-on-one, and create context, especially revolving around, plant medicine, entheogens, psychedelics, just general health, revolving around the mind, the body, and spirit, and trying to be just a lighthouse here in my little shop, where you bring your boat in, and we're a safe harbor here to ask questions, hold discussions, and learn. And then when your ship needs to leave the harbor, you always know that you can come back here to gain knowledge or to share. And I hope you're bringing something back to share, because that's the whole point of being on the journey, is to go find new knowledge and bring it back.
I love that. I have a goofy question before a serious question I want to direct the conversation in. But so as an engineer, being in tech, also in mushrooms, do you feel what brought you into working in tech, maybe the internet, World Wide Web, and mycelium, do you see them as a similar thing or a similar connection, like at a soul level? Do you see them as being similar?
Ooh, that's I love that question. Okay. So I'm part of the first internet generation, right? When I was in middle school, you could go log on to a BBS with a dial up and go look at your college library catalog.
Gen Z is like, what are you even talking about, dude? Yeah, I know Google and TikTok. That's it. Right.
I'm laughing at this because what the internet created was it created this mass transit of mycelial information. It created there's this funny quote about the guy, one of the old senators who's talking about the tubes, the internet's tubes, and information goes through the tubes. And I'm laughing at that. It's actually a pretty good relation. It's not necessarily tubes as much as it is kind of mycelial connections, right? So every single spore starts from a point, and that point creates hyphae, which is the reaching fingers of the mycelial network, and they start connecting together and creating these organic pathways. And I think the internet created a lot of that same type of prolific growth of how mycelium grows what we call rhizomorphically, which is at a prolific rate where everything starts connecting and moving in the direction towards the root source, towards the source of energy, towards the food. And I think that was an amazing onset of what the internet was from 82, right, all the way up until, I'm going to say 2017. And you're going to say, why 2017, James? Well, if you remember in 2017, there seemed to be a huge cultural shift with the way that we consume content online.
Oh yeah.
All right. And I'm picking 2017. That doesn't mean that these systems weren't there, but it seems like the idea of being viral, all right, the idea of reaching as many people with a funny thing or this idea or this message or this cute video or this filter, that type of idea really seemed to become the first point of context for people to be engaging with each other through the internet. And I want to call this out. I want to say, this is something I give full credit to Terrence McKenna. But we now exist in what I call, with the way we use the internet, in what's called a meme society. All right. And meme is it's an acronym. And I always wonder whether or not people know what it means, but it's minimum effort, maximum effect. That's what meme means. So the minimum effort that someone can put forth to create or send a message to gain the maximum effect. So when you see that meme of somebody making a stupid face or a dog doing something dumb and you go, oh my God. Well, if you responded like that, then it did its job. It was a minimum effort for you to look at something and then gain a maximum effect with an emotional response. And here we are, we're in this terminology that we go back and forth about how we act. I really think we're in this new transition because what has happened is the mycelium has installed, but the greater culture of the internet is into this call out culture rather than the growth.
Yeah.
And I'd really like us to get back to the growth because the internet offers so many amazing opportunities for people to connect, whether it's social media apps like Clubhouse or Instagram or Facebook or, even MySpace, right? Remember MySpace? Oh my God. Friendster. Right? It keeps moving, it keeps progressing. And that's the interesting idea about how the growth of social media, of the internet of content and the internet of things and all the way that things are connected is related to mycelium. But it's like, what are we feeding that mycelium that makes the internet more useful and more engaging to all of the people that are involved with it?
Yeah, for sure. It needs some feeder, and right now we might be monocropping the internet by spending most of our time on 4 to 5 websites.
Over isolation is what we say in mycology. Don't over isolate your genetics because then it becomes comatose, and you don't want comatose growth. You want prolific
there you
growth.
Go. It all comes together. It all makes sense. Yeah, no. So that's great. And I mean, I thought of that from I just like heard you talking about it. I'm like, man, it feels like there's some kind of interconnectedness in this person's mind. But diving back into it, I kind of want to actually talk for a second before we talk about, business and the effects of business, legislation, legalization on this space. I'm curious, so you've been in Silicon Valley for a while now. Did you see these tech entrepreneurs, individuals in tech starting to use entheogens, these plant medicines, to help them in their own life, but in business, create with their creativity, innovation, like creative problem solving?
Yes. And let me just say that when the retreat was, let's go to Six Flags and take some mushrooms as a team exercise, I realized I was in the right industry at that time.
The right industry, right place, the right time.
Yeah. And that was a timing thing, friends. I wanted to say that's alleged, right? I don't want to call out any former employers or team members for advocating for illegal activities or anything like that. But yeah. I mean, it was a discussion. It was even at the conservative companies that I worked at, when you're tapped in, when you're tuned in, and turned on, as Mr. Larry liked to say, we're not dropping out anymore. Actually, we're dropping in.
Yeah.
When you're turned on and tuned in, the other psychonauts, the other individuals will find you. And so I was surprised many a time in my professional career of some of the people that approached me and asked me questions, or kind of the moment I said I was working with mushrooms for my wife's cancer, every question was psilocybin mushrooms. and that to me is the fun part about this. That's why I am so enthusiastic and engaging, is that my reintroduction into mushrooms, into psychedelics, and into and plant medicines in general, it wasn't from this initial standpoint of like, hey, I want to heal myself because I'm having a hard time internally. It was wow, this could help my wife. And then when I started having trouble, I was like, oh shit, this is something I know. This is something I've done before. And man, I don't want to feel like I do on those drugs. And that right there, that ability to make that decision, now that's the power of psychedelics, my friends, is that you decide that you're going to do it. And that decision is the catalyst that creates personal growth and health.
Yeah. So you've seen, obviously, remarkable improvement in your wife with her physical health, although who knows like what cancer ultimately is, right? And the source of that could come from multiple aspects, emotional, spiritual trauma, who knows? But so you've seen physical health improvements with your wife going into remission. And we've talked a little bit about the usage of it to be like tuned in and how tech has used that. Have you used it through your life, and is this almost a practice for you to, whether it's in business or in my opinion, business is connected to one's own soul or decision making. Do you use it as a tool to make decisions that are tuned in, whether to the world around you or to even, your own soul, your own purpose? Do you use it as a tool to connect?
Yeah, that is a really good question. You're coming with good ones, Jake, and I just want to acknowledge your questions and things, because for me at this point with the use of entheogens, and alleged, of course, right, when we talk about these things in open spaces, it comes down to what's the day-to-day application, like what am I trying to balance out, and I always look at those three aspects as, and you guys hear this all the time, so don't think I'm trying to coin this or nothing like that. But the idea of like the mind, right? Like, how do you gain knowledge? How are you learning? The body, how are you making your body move? Are you being physical on a daily basis? And then the spirit, like, where's your faith? Like, is your faith on what you're doing? Is your faith in the people around you? Is your faith in your beautiful dog? Like, I don't know. Like, but these ideas to me of building balance around those things. And so when I start approaching business, when I start looking at like ideas or concepts for me to work on for myself or for other people around me, what I do is I try to take a heartfelt approach from what the medicine teaches me, and that application could be with direct consumption, asking a question. It could be with my day-to-day functional needs, or it could be with not even taking it at all. And that to me is, I think, where a lot of the ideas of what it can be as a tool, right? It's like, if you're using it every single day, it's not a tool, it's a crutch. Okay. And to me, the idea of psychedelics and personal health and entheogens and personal health, they're a tool there for you to reconnect, to tap in, to get into the mainframe with the correct, screws to open up the door so that you can look at the circuitry, and so I try to know when I want to use my tools. And so that's how I apply it in my day-to-day use, because, obviously, as the guy that owns a business called the Shroom Shop and living in San Francisco, literally like 2 blocks from Hippie Hill, like I could walk there while we're talking here. There's an automatic assumption that I'm like a high-level psychonaut that like is consuming mushrooms or entheogens or psychedelics on a consistent basis. And I just want to douse that idea as much as it is fun to think about.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. And it leads me to the next question in that field. So, we talked about tool versus crutch. I'm just genuinely curious. Have you, whether in making a business decision or even a personal decision in your relationships, maybe with your health, maybe psychologically, have you had moments with these medicines, with mushrooms, where they actually give you a certain direction, a course of action to take, a moment of divine, or shall we say mycelial inspiration?
Yes. Yeah. And the cool thing about working with psychedelics is the concept, the term that I like to just kind of rattle around in my brain is truth, right? When you ask the question, the response that you like, it's easy to trick yourself, right? When we're running around and we're busy all day, we got too many things going on, it's easy to kind of convince yourself that things are okay, or, oh, it's okay if I do that. Even though deep down in your gut, your soul, you shouldn't do that, or maybe you need to take a break, or maybe this isn't the right time, but it's going to give you some sort of kind of resolve to the situation for you personally. And so, I think in the end, it's kind of like the timing, right? It's like, what's the question you're trying to ask, and like, do you have the time to sit in that space and hold it? I'm a father in conjunction with a small business owner that's running around and trying to talk about topics like this on a regular basis, and so the time to hold space is an important thing. And when I enter those moments and ask those questions, like I try and really focus myself, because usually, even though I might have multiple questions, there's really only one question that I want to kind of tap into. And then that's when I'm going to hold deeper space for myself and give myself that time to try and meditate and figure out my own answer to that question. But yes, I do get messages when I rattled around there. Yes, I do get those messages. They kind of, because you can't get lied to is really what happens. Is they're like, well, don't do that, dumbass. I mean, there's a reason I think the mushrooms in general have the personality of a teacher, because, a teacher will tell you the truth no matter what, and they'll try and guide you towards the direction that is right, but you get to make the choice. When you work with heavier, deeper, more involved psychedelics, you get different types of personalities of relationships that come out. Grandmother, grandfather, uncle, aunt, brother, sister, things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. So moving forward, like, I'm really curious, talking about as a business owner, someone thinking inside this space, someone that speaks on this, saw you at a conference talking about this specific issue. But, moving forward, there's movement to either legalize or decriminalize various plant medicines, including mushrooms, other entheogens inside of the US and around the world. First, do you think this is a good idea to legalize or decriminalize? What are some of the things that you think are important, and what are the things that we need to watch out for?
Well, we live in a capitalist society, so we just acknowledge that first and foremost before we get into this discussion, because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you lie, money makes the world go round. So we'll just acknowledge that as a starting point. Now, decriminalization and legalization are two terms, two topics that are sometimes confused, and that's okay. It's not, but legalization really refers to a framework for licensure, dispensation, for activation, for transportation, for all the Asians that exist in the world that kind of exist here in California for cannabis. Okay, so we have a legal cannabis market here. We have a cannabis control board, which is a huge regulatory system here in California that allows the legal cannabis system to exist. So that's a capital market. Now, decriminalization is the idea that we will not legally penalize, we will not police anybody for the personal consumption of entheogens or plant medicine, fungi, whatever, psychedelics, whatever your locale, because this is where it really starts getting a little bit more interesting, is that decriminalization really focuses on the locale, whether it's a city, county, a state. Decriminalization is really more about giving the community access to the medicines. Now, when we start talking about legalization, we start talking about the taxation and the forming of all the systems for anybody to gain access within a safe and controlled format. Now, entheogens, right? Entheogens, the natural psychedelics that exist in the world, have been, they grow naturally in the world. And so we kind of get into this discussion, to me, that really focuses on like, well, what is personal consumption? And then what is the market that we create for the legal consumption? And there's all this middle ground that exists between what legalization would be, where you go to a dispensary, get microdoses, get a dose that could take you on a journey. And then what decriminalization means, which is creating the community programs, which is decriminalization, education, integration, facilitation, right? These are all the services that need to be around that. So when you decriminalize and you put that framework first, you create the space for all the services that are required to support people that are consuming the medicine to evolve. If you push something that is closer to legalization without letting those things organically evolve to the community, then we miss out on this great opportunity to let psychedelics, entheogens, to really be used in a way that serves the local people first and foremost. And that goes right back to the ancient technologies and the way that different tribes and different cultures used plant medicines, psychedelics, mushrooms as a part of their healing within their societies.
Yeah, great. And so this wasn't something that I was super familiar with before this past weekend, the difference between legalization and education, but legalization and decriminalization. But to me, like, I'm convinced that it's actually like vitally important, because what we did see with cannabis, I personally don't smoke cannabis, and if someone else does, that's cool. But there you go. But what did happen, right, is like it went from being something that could put you in jail for being in possession of it to, oh, now it's okay. You can have possession of this. You can use it. Those people that are in prison, oops, sorry, still in prison. But you can only access it if, one, you can medically prove that you need it, and two, or I should say, because if it's just legalized socially, that's a whole other thing. But if you can access it because of the funds that you have, which it's not the cheapest thing in the world to go and buy cannabis inside of a store, and you do it inside of a mall that looks like it's a casino in Las Vegas, and there's big screens everywhere, and obviously it's very expensive to run. So, right, it's like a capitalistic environment. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can spend $60, $100, $200, $500 a month on accessing it.
Yeah, and then that's what we like to call the pay-to-play model. Right. It's like you have to have a certain amount of money, even to play, even to get into the game, to get into the casino. And unfortunately, that's 90% of what, super PACs, lobbying groups that are moving towards the legislative communities across the country that are now making cannabis either decriminalized, legal, medicalized. I mean, the amount of growth in the cannabis industry over the last 3 years alone is what the staking is going on from the capital mindset of people into psychedelic, the emerging psychedelic space. However, the thing that really catches me a lot is we talk about consumption, right? And the day-to-day use of psychedelics without it being excessive, right? Because we have to acknowledge that excessive use will exist. Mm-hmm. But the day-to-day use don't follow the same. It doesn't follow the same consumption models as cannabis. So even if we're staking the idea on the cannabis industry's development that a day-to-day user would go to a dispensary and spend $40 to $100, that's not going to be the case with psychedelics, right? It's not going to be, because, when we look at the cannabis market right now, the gray area market is creating this huge hole. And that's because they've made it inaccessible to the people in the middle, the small farmers, the mid-scale farmers, the taxation charges, the acreage charges, the licensure charges, all of those things like that exist for people that are trying to work legally in the cannabis space are going to be transitioned over to psychedelics in the same manner. And that will make anybody that's a small farmer or that is growing 2 or 3 tubs of psilocybin mushrooms that might put out more than what the limit is being currently put towards for psilocybin dried fruit bodies here in California, it might put them at risk. And it's like, what? Like, wait a minute. Like, you literally are putting everybody at risk here in this is California, right? And there's other states and other locales that are talking about this. But I think the point that I would like to make out here is there's special interests in back channel discussions with your legislators and all the legislators that are trying to push certain points on this on the legislation to allow financial interest groups to come in, right? And so I'm a small business. I'm here in San Francisco. It is an expensive place, but by no means am I funded or in any. I operate on a day-to-day and try and serve my community locally here, and that is what has made me successful. That's what has made my business successful. I'm going to repeat that. I have worked and focused myself here on my local community. And while I live in San Francisco, there's tech money and VCs and all these interested people that want to know what the emerging space is going to be like. It focuses on the local communities first. And then as those local communities develop and expand, the opportunities for scalability or growth are going to come out of those local communities, not off of you being able to grow a whole bunch of mushrooms and make 10,000 mushroom chocolates a month and distribute them across legal areas.
Mm-hmm. This is probably a very deep discussion that we could continue and needs to be continued for many, many hours and across many different states with different types of people. But it's definitely a consideration, I think, for the advancement of the field is important. And I appreciate you thinking and caring so deeply about it, not only your local environment, but others as well, and seeing what could potentially go right or go wrong in the future, depending on the choices that we make. I do want to wrap up in a second. I something is telling me to ask this because I think it would just be very, very fascinating if you're willing to share. That is relating to something in your business career, whether it means stepping away from something or actually an idea, saying yes to something, any type of thing. Has your connection with mushrooms or any other entheogen plant medicine directed a decision? You said yes earlier, but would you be willing to share one that you felt is pivotal inside of your life that either led you to or away from something that otherwise you don't feel like you would have known?
Sure. There's actually more than one, but I'll talk about the one that I think that revolves around mushroom cultivation. That I hold a lot of space for because it's just an interesting concept, right? Like I came from tech. Okay. And in tech, everything is about your ability to scale, your ability to support the processes that you have in place to be able to manage all the different variables revolving around the product that you're creating. Maybe it's hardware, maybe it's software, whatever. And so when I entered into mushroom growing, once I initially started growing just for myself, and the level of prolific growth that was like available was, I was like, oh my God, if it just did this every time, you would have more mushrooms than you know what to do with. And so I took that approach towards a lot of my business development, revolving around scalability and teaching and showing people like, yeah, look at how easy and how quickly you can make it happen. But the hard part or the learning experience that came from teaching people how to scale was their ability to keep it going. And, taking people from nowhere to 100 is doable. But the idea of business, right? Of business is about being able to do it again and again consistently, and being able to deliver to the people that you support. And with mushroom cultivation, I learned as I watched other people, and they were successful. Don't get me wrong, they were successful. But I watched them as they moved into the next levels from just growing into what to do, to realize that a lot of these discussions that we're talking about in this industry needs more. It needs more. It's this idea of the golden ticket. We think that because you've been turned on, or because you've had an amazing journey or experience and you're on your journey. And I just want to reiterate that, guys. It's about the journey. It's not the end point of the journey. It's the journey itself. I was able to learn through those experiences, watching people fail once I handed them the keys, so to say. I handed them the keys. I said, here you go, my friend. You have learned, you have done your job. Move on, keep going. The idea of failure was so scary that the mushrooms didn't respond the way that those individuals were looking for. And it made me realize that when you find your space here in psychedelics, it's not about the experience, it's about the journey. And so whatever journey you undertake and whatever you're working towards, whether you're educating people, or you're providing for people, or you're working on it, maintain the journey and focus on the journey, and don't think about the end result, because all those numbers don't really matter to the mushrooms. There you go, bro. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's what I got, man.
Appreciate it.
Dude, I'm really enjoyed this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure. Your questions are amazing, and it's fun. It's fun to connect. I'm glad that we got to meet in person first and foremost. It's really where I love doing my thing, and like I said, keep up with the journey, man. And I hope I can't wait to come back on the next one and hear about the other cool people you talk to, and counterpoints, and all these amazing things as this industry creates space for all of us.
Amen to that. Thank you so much for jumping on.